My dad forged my signature on a property sale. Before we begin the story, make sure to subscribe to our channel and never miss more incredible stories every day. Ms. Rivera, this is Dana at Northgate Title. Why are you denying your signature on the seller packet if you already signed at closing? I was standing in the hallway outside my 7th grade classroom, holding a stack of ungraded essays and a coffee that had gone cold 2 periods ago. Kids were laughing in the stairwell. The fluorescent lights buzzed, and a stranger on the phone was calmly asking why I was denying a signature I had never written. I didn't sign anything, I said. What property? There was a pause, the kind professionals use when they realize the conversation just changed categories. The duplex on East Mercer. Seller file shows Richard Rivera and Clara Rivera as transfers. Closing was scheduled for tomorrow at 10 a.m. Escrow is fully funded. My throat went dry. East Mercer was my grandmother's duplex. She left it to me and my sister, Lena, in probate 3 years ago. I own half, legally. My signature was not optional. Without it, there should be no sale. I knew that much because I kept the probate folder in a fireproof box and actually read things before signing them. Mostly because my father spent my childhood mocking me for asking questions. I teach public school English in Columbus. I rent a 1-bedroom over a laundromat. I drive a 12-year-old Civic with a window that sticks in winter. East Mercer was never my dream house, but it was security. 2 rental units, 1 good tenant. 1 unit we fixed slowly. If something happened, job loss, medical issue, that duplex meant I would not drown. Dana lowered her voice. Ms. Rivera, I need to ask directly. Did you appear before a notary on March 14th to sign a warranty deed? No, I said. On March 14th, I was chaperoning a school field trip. She inhaled once, sharp. Then we need to stop this immediately. I looked through the hallway window at my students and realized my father had just turned paperwork into a crime. Dana asked me not to call anyone yet, not even family, until she flagged the file and locked the wire instructions. By lunch, I was driving toward a sale I never authorized. My father has always treated documents like props and people like signatures he could collect later. When I was a kid, Richard could charm a bank manager, a contractor, and 3 neighbors before breakfast. He wore cologne that arrived 5 seconds before he did, kept monogrammed pins in his jacket, and talked about leverage the way normal parents talked about weather. If I asked what a form meant, he'd tap the page and say, "It means we're moving forward, Clara. Don't get sentimental over paper." My grandmother hated that. She owned the East Mercer duplex long before Richard started acting like every family asset was a branch office of his ego. The place wasn't glamorous. Brick, 2 units, a narrow side drive, creaky back stairs, but she rented to teachers and nurses and called it the house that pays for groceries. When she died, probate got ugly for 6 months because Dad kept insisting it would be simpler if everything transferred through him for management. It didn't. Her will split the duplex 50-50 between Lena and me. Dad was not on title. Lena signed over day-to-day management to him anyway. He knows real estate, she told me. Why make this harder? Because he always made things harder, just later. The recent moment that kept replaying in my head happened 6 weeks before Dana's call. Richard hosted one of his patio dinners at his place in Dublin. String lights, catered salmon, expensive people laughing too loudly. I came straight from parent conferences in a cardigan that smelled like dry erase markers. He looked me up and down and said, with a smile sharp enough for an audience, "Clara still teaches children metaphors while adults handle assets." People chuckled. Lena stared at her plate. I told him, adults also read what they sign. He leaned in, still smiling. That's cute. Trust is how families move quickly. At the time, I thought he was just performing. On the drive to Northgate Title, I realized he had been telling me exactly what he planned to steal. Then Dana emailed me the first document, and my stomach dropped harder. The first thing Dana sent was a PDF of the seller information sheet. It had my name typed correctly, my old apartment address from 2 years ago, and a Gmail account I stopped using in 2021. Next to preferred contact, someone had entered a number ending in 4428. Not mine. Look at the initials on each page, Dana said over speaker while I sat in Northgate's parking lot. They're consistent, but not identical. That can happen. What concerns me is the email chain attached to your file. The chain showed messages from Clara Rivera, home files at, confirming inspection access, agreeing to a credit for roof flashing, and approving a revised closing date. Every message was short, almost aggressively bland. No punctuation quirks. No teacher-length sentences. No questions. Just, looks fine, proceed. That alone would have been creepy. What pushed me into full panic was the attachment list. It included a copy of my driver's license. I keep my license on me. I do not email photos of it to title companies. I called Richard from the car. He answered on the second ring, smooth as ever. Kiddo, I'm in a meeting. Why is Northgate Title calling me about East Mercer? He exhaled like I was interrupting a small annoyance. Administrative cleanup. Lena wanted to sell. I'm handling it. You cannot handle my signature. Don't be dramatic. Nothing's final. We're just seeing numbers. I almost believed him for 10 seconds because that was his talent, saying impossible things in a voice built for confidence. Then Dana texted me a screenshot of the county auditor transfer estimate tied to parcel notifications and a lockbox photo a tenant had sent her when she asked for access records. Metal box on the front rail. Realtor logo. Installed 3 days earlier. I texted the downstairs tenant, and he replied immediately. Your dad said sale was already done. Richard came back on the line. Clara, lower your voice. This is routine. That was the moment his calm started sounding like a threat. I drove straight to Richard's office instead of home. His company used to occupy the entire second floor of a polished brick building near Bridge Park. That afternoon, only half the lights were on, and the receptionist's desk was empty except for a fake orchid and a sign telling visitors to call a number for assistance. I found him in a glass conference room with 2 men in suits and a tray of untouched cookies. He smiled when he saw me, like I'd arrived for a surprise party. Gentlemen, give us a minute. My daughter is panicking over paperwork. I waited until the door closed. Northgate Title has a seller packet with my name, my ID, and a signature that isn't mine. He stayed standing, hands loose in his pockets. Lena agreed to the sale. You're getting your share. Why are you making a scene before you've even heard the plan? Because forgery is not a plan. He actually laughed. You teachers love dramatic nouns. I felt heat climb my neck. Did you sign for me? Relax. It's a placeholder while we move the file. These people need momentum. Before I could answer, someone knocked. A man in a wrinkled blazer stepped in, glanced at Richard, then at me. Mr. Rivera? I have service for you. Richard's smile snapped for 1 second. He took the envelope, thanked the man too politely, and waited for him to leave. When he looked back at me, the charm was thinner. What is that? I asked. Business dispute. The envelope had a court caption visible through the window. Franklin County Common Pleas. I only caught 3 words before he flipped it over. Notice of default and demand. My phone buzzed. Dana again. Clara, buyer's lender requested final wire confirmation. File shows you signed, today at 1:17 p.m. It was 1:24. I had been in Richard's office, in front of him, at 1:17. I held up the message. You forged a time-stamped signature while I was standing in your building. Richard stepped closer and dropped his voice. If you blow this up, you won't just hurt me. The default notice in his hand changed everything I thought this was. That night Lena called before I even made it home. Dad said you stormed into his office and accused him of a felony, she said, voice already tight. I could hear dishes clinking in the background at his house. Clara, what are you doing? I'm doing what someone should have done years ago, reading the documents. She groaned. He was trying to sell East Mercer before the roof gets worse. Dana said the buyer is good. We need this. We need what? My forged signature? Maybe he signed a preliminary thing. People do that. It's not like he stole your money. I sat on the edge of my bed, shoes still on, staring at the paint blister near my window. Lena, if he signs for me, the buyer can say I agreed. If taxes are wrong, if disclosures are wrong, if there's a lawsuit, my name is on it. This is not Dad borrowing a ladder. This is fraud. She went quiet long enough that I thought the call dropped. Then she said, softer, please don't report anything yet. He said there are loans tied up, and if the deal collapses, everything gets ugly. There it was. Not denial. Fear. I asked what loans. Talk to him. Exactly what he wanted. Every fact routed through him. Every version softened before it reached me. Aunt May called an hour later, which meant Lena had already told her. May never wastes words. You safe? She asked first. Safe, yes. Furious, also yes. Good. Stay furious until you have copies. I laughed once, bitter. Lena thinks I'm overreacting. May made a noise like a drawer shutting. Your father trained all of you to treat urgency as proof he's right. Listen carefully. Paper lies last longer than spoken lies. I wrote it down on a grocery receipt because I knew I'd need it when Richard started crying or shouting or promising. Then May added, and stop speaking to him on the phone unless you're ready to take notes. An hour later, Richard texted the family group. We will discuss this Sunday. No outside lawyers. That one line told me he was afraid of exactly the right thing. I didn't wait for Sunday morning. The next morning, I used a personal day, drove to East Mercer, and let myself into the upstairs unit with my key. The tenant there had moved out 2 weeks earlier, and Richard said he was turning it for repainting. Instead, I found staging furniture, a vanilla candle burning on the counter, and a folder shoved inside the kitchen junk drawer under a roll of shelf liner. It was labeled Mercer Clothes in Richard's handwriting. Inside were printouts of inspection responses, a draft settlement statement, and a checklist with boxes marked in blue ink. HOA/A, payoff request, seller ID, notarized deed. We didn't even have an HOA, which told me he was reusing some template and moving too fast to care. My name appeared on nearly every page. Some spots had initials that looked like mine if you squinted. Some didn't. Then I found the page that made my hands shake. A photocopy of my driver's license, front and back, slightly cropped, with a date stamp from Richard's office scanner. 03/09, 8:12 p.m. On March 9th, I had been at his house for Lena's birthday dinner. At one point he'd asked to borrow my purse because I had gum and he was setting the table outside. I remembered laughing and tossing it to him over a chair. I sat down on the bare floor and said out loud, to nobody, "You took my license out of my wallet." My phone buzzed with an email notification from the fake Gmail account Dana had forwarded. New message, subject line, final seller ACKS. The sender name displayed as Clara Rivera. Richard had either automated forwarding or left the account open on a device still syncing. And he'd just forgotten I existed as a person who could read timestamps. I forwarded the email to Dana, then to a new folder I created called Mercer Fraud. I took photos of every page in the folder, including the checklist and scanner stamp. I put everything back exactly where I found it. If he realized I'd seen the folder, he would start burning his mistakes. The next 2 days felt like teaching myself a language while the exam was already happening. Dana couldn't give me legal advice, but she could tell me what was in the file and what procedures had triggered internal concern. Your acknowledgement block says notarized in Delaware County, she said. Do you work there? No. I was in Franklin County with 28 middle schoolers and a permission slip clipboard. She emailed a copy of the deed prepared for recording. Special warranty deed. Sellers listed as Lena Rivera and Clara Rivera. Buyer listed as Mercer Oak Homes, LLC. Purchase price $412,000. My signature was loopy in places mine is angular. The notary stamp showed a valid commission and seal number. Valid seal. Real notary. Wrong signer. At the Franklin County Recorder's site, I pulled the existing deed from probate. Lena and I were listed as tenants in common, each 50%. No transfer out. No power of attorney recorded. No affidavit granting Richard signing authority. I paid for certified copies anyway because Dana said, if this gets contested, originals and certified records matter. Then I called a number on an old East Mercer contractor invoice and reached Richard's former assistant, who'd quit last fall. I asked one careful question. Did Dad ever ask staff to send documents as me? Silence. Then, I can't get involved. I found a copy of my ID in a closing folder. Another silence, longer this time. Check any emails from him after hours, she said quietly. He used to queue messages and send from clients' accounts at weird times. If it says you replied in 60 seconds to a 6-page attachment, it probably wasn't you. I checked. She was right. 3 Clara. Replies went out between 11:48 and 11:53 p.m. on a Tuesday when I was proctoring state test prep and asleep by 10. At my bank branch, I asked if anyone had requested a medallion stamp or signature verification tied to me recently. No, but the manager printed a note showing Richard had called asking what documents were needed for a daughter who couldn't attend. By Thursday, every timestamp pointed to planning, not panic. I got the mini twist from a mistake Richard made because he couldn't resist sounding important. He left me a voicemail at 6:11 a.m., probably assuming I wouldn't save it. Clara, stop poisoning this transaction. The buyer's bridge lender is already lined up, and there are disbursements scheduled. If East Mercer doesn't fund by Friday, there will be cascading defaults. You do not understand the dominoes. Cascading defaults. Not a family decision. Not roof repairs. Dominoes. Dana later confirmed something she technically didn't have to tell me. The preliminary settlement statement included an unusually large wire payoff labeled Mid-State Commercial Lien Release, amount $186,400, due same day as closing. That is not a normal seller expense for a duplex in this price range, she said carefully. It wasn't attached to East Mercer. It was attached to Richard. I went to the county clerk window with the case number from the envelope I'd seen in his office. Public records are both boring and devastating when they involve your family. Richard had personally guaranteed a line of credit for one of his development companies. The company missed payments. A default judgment motion was pending. A creditor had filed a lien against another property and was seeking additional collateral pressure. The East Mercer sale proceeds were being used to plug that hole before anyone looked too closely. I still didn't know the full why, whether he was trying to save his reputation, avoid bankruptcy headlines, or keep Lena from finding out how bad things were. But I knew what the sale would do if it went through. It would convert my inherited half into cash he could route, leave me fighting over missing funds, and potentially drag me into disclosure disputes because my forged signature sat on seller documents. The downstairs tenant texted me that evening. Realtor says upstairs tenant moving in next week. Am I supposed to leave? That's when the risk stopped being abstract. This wasn't just my father's lie and my name. It was a tenant's housing, my grandmother's property, and a legal trail already heading toward county records. I finally understood why Richard sounded less angry than rushed. By Friday morning, I had enough to stop closing. I did not yet have enough to survive the family version of what came next. Dana marked the file as disputed identity/signature and froze release pending review. That prevented wires from going out, but it also set off alarms with the buyer, agents, and lender. Richard started calling every 20 minutes. I let most of them go to voicemail and built a timeline instead. I printed 10 years of my real signatures from boring places, teaching contracts, voter registration, DMV renewal, even a field trip permission log where parents had watched me sign in front of them. I highlighted how I crossed my capital C and how my R in Rivera hooks backward. On the forged deed, the C was round and the R dropped straight down. I requested a certified copy of the probate order and the current deed. I took screenshots of the fake Gmail timestamps. I saved the scanner-stamped copy of my license from the Mercer Close folder. I wrote down every call, date, and exact phrase Richard used, placeholder, momentum, cascading defaults. Then I made the hardest list, reasons not to push this legally. Lena might lose the income she counted on. Dad's name could end up in a fraud complaint. Family friends would pick sides before facts. School parents might hear my name connected to investigation and not care what kind. Aunt May came over with soup and a yellow legal pad. She listened while I spiraled through every consequence. When I finished, she pointed at the page and circled one line I'd buried in the middle. He used my ID without permission. That, she said, tapping the words, is the story. Everything else is weather. I asked, do I stop the sale quietly and make him sign something? Or do I document everything and force this into the light? May looked toward my fireproof box on the shelf. Quiet only works when the other person is ashamed. Richard left a voicemail while she was there, voice suddenly soft. Clara, please, call me before strangers make this irreversible. I saved it under a new folder label, Guilt Trips. Sunday dinner at Richard's house felt like a mediation staged by someone who thought candles could replace accountability. Lena sat rigid at the table, napkin folded into a perfect square she never touched. Richard had cooked himself for once. Steak, roasted potatoes, asparagus, his old trick for signaling sincerity. Aunt May came in 10 minutes late, kissed my forehead, and sat beside me without asking permission. Richard lifted his glass. Before Clara turns this into a courtroom, let's remember we are family and everyone here acted under pressure. I said, I didn't act at all. That's the problem. He set his glass down. The buyer was solid. The price was above market. Lena agreed. I signed a provisional packet to keep escrow moving until we could all meet. Dana had already explained this to me twice. There is no provisional forged signature. Either you sign or you don't. Why use my old email? I asked. He blinked once. I don't manage your inbox, Clara. Why is a copy of my license in your closing folder with your office scanner stamp? Lena's head snapped up. What folder? Richard turned to her first, not me. She was trespassing at East Mercer. It's my property, I said. He leaned back, changed tactics, and let his voice crack just enough to sound wounded. I was trying to prevent a disaster. There are obligations you don't understand. Men I've worked with for 20 years are depending on me. If this deal collapses, they lose jobs. Lena loses income. You think a classroom salary can fix what happens next? There it was, the contempt wrapped in panic. For one awful second I almost caved. Not because I believed him, but because I could already picture the family version of this story, with me cast as the rigid daughter who called strangers and burned down Thanksgiving forever. Then May spoke, calm as a judge. Richard, say the sentence out loud. He frowned. What sentence? The one where you explain why Clara's signature appears on a deed she didn't sign. The room went so quiet I could hear the fridge humming in the next room. Richard looked at me like he was choosing his next lie. The trap worked because I stopped arguing with Richard and started acting agreeable. Monday morning, I texted him, we need a clean fix. Let's meet with title and sort paperwork. He answered in under a minute with a thumbs up and a time, which told me he believed he could talk his way through professionals if he kept the room small. I called Dana and asked what kind of meeting Northgate would allow if a signer was disputing identity. She said they could host a file review with their compliance manager present, and if I wanted, I could bring counsel. I didn't have a lawyer yet, but Dana's tone changed when I emailed the scanner-stamped ID copy and timeline. Bring your sister, she said. If she's listed as co-seller, she needs to hear this in real time. I told Lena it was only to clear up title delays. She agreed after 3 missed calls and 1 message that read, please don't humiliate him. At lunch, I spread everything across my tiny kitchen table in order, not by emotion but by timestamp. Probate deed first. Current county record second. Fake Gmail printouts third. My real signature samples fourth. Draft deed with forged signature fifth. Northgate email showing signed at 1:17 p.m. while I was physically in Richard's office. Screenshot of my school's sign-out log. Photo of the Mercer close folder. Voicemail transcript with cascading defaults. Case docket for his default notice. I labeled each page with sticky notes so nobody could redirect the conversation into fog. Aunt May came over just long enough to look at the stack and squeeze my shoulder. Good, she said. Truth likes order. At 3:40, Richard texted again. No need for drama. We sign corrections and move on. I wrote back, yes. Let's correct the record in person. We met Tuesday at Northgate in a glass conference room with a screen on the wall, a speakerphone in the center, and a pitcher of water nobody touched. Dana sat at one end with a closed file. Lena sat beside Richard, pale and angry. I sat across from them with my binder. Richard smiled at Dana like they were old colleagues. I'm sure this is a misunderstanding. Dana opened the file and said, then let's start with the notary block. Dana didn't raise her voice once, which somehow made the whole thing harsher. She put the deed on the screen first and highlighted the notary acknowledgement. This states Clara Rivera personally appeared before a notary in Delaware County on March 14th at 1:17 p.m. Ms. Rivera has disputed appearance and signature. Richard leaned forward, palms open. There may have been a remote signing issue. My office coordinates a lot of closings. Dana clicked to the next slide. Northgate's internal notes showing no approved remote online notarization, no identity session recording, and no signed authorization appointing an agent. This file was processed as in-person wet signature paperwork, she said. I handed over my school district field trip roster and sign-out log. I was at COSI with students from 8:05 a.m. to 3:42 p.m. on March 14th. Lena whispered, Dad. He ignored her and turned to me. You're humiliating me over a clerical shortcut. I slid my signature comparison pages across the table. Clerical shortcuts don't copy my license and build fake email accounts. Dana then opened the seller email chain metadata printout. The room got very still. Messages from Clara Rivera originated from an IP address assigned to Rivera Development Group on multiple dates. Timestamps correspond to after-hours office activity. Richard's jaw tightened. This is absurd. Anyone could use office Wi-Fi. I put the scanner-stamped ID copy beside the metadata page. And anyone could scan my license from your office at 8:12 p.m. On Lena's birthday? Lena stared at the page like it might rearrange itself into an excuse. You took her ID? Richard finally snapped. I borrowed a copy because you two freeze every decision. I built everything this family has, and suddenly a duplex needs 3 committees and a permission slip from a schoolteacher? There it was, motive stripped clean. Not just debt panic. Control. Entitlement. The belief that my legal ownership was an inconvenience compared to his timeline. Dana closed the file. Mr. Rivera, we are suspending the transaction and issuing a fraud escalation notice today. Richard stood so fast his chair hit the wall. Then he pointed at me and said the quiet part in front of everyone. The quiet part was this. You'd rather see your own father ruined than let me handle one property. Lena burst into tears. Dana stepped into the hallway to bring in compliance and, I assume, document everything while it was fresh. Richard kept pacing and muttering about defamation, incompetent staff, disloyal family. I sat there shaking so hard I had to hold my own wrists under the table to keep them still. By the end of the day, Northgate sent formal notices that the file was suspended pending identity fraud review. Escrow funds were frozen. The buyer's agent called twice, furious. I gave her Dana's number and said exactly one sentence. I did not authorize any sale documents. I repeated it so many times that week it started to sound like a prayer. I filed a police report, which felt surreal and awful. The officer at the desk was kind, but hearing myself say my father forged my signature on a deed made me feel like I was telling a story about someone else. I also filed an identity theft affidavit and put a fraud alert on my credit. Dana's compliance team said they would notify underwriters and their legal department. The county recorder hadn't accepted the deed yet, which was the only reason this was still reversible instead of catastrophic. Lena didn't speak to me for 6 days. When she finally texted, it was one line. Did you really call the police? I replied, yes. He used my identity. At school, I taught all day and dealt with fallout in parking lots between grading and grocery runs. I missed a curriculum meeting because a detective returned my call. One parent saw me crying in my car and asked if I was sick. I said, family emergency, which was true and not nearly enough. Aunt May became my landing pad. She kept copies at her house, drove me to the recorder's office for certified documents, and reminded me to eat actual meals. Guilt is not evidence, she said whenever I spiraled. Richard sent letters through a lawyer 3 days later, denying intent and calling the signature an expedient accommodation pending ratification. Even after the fraud report, he still thought words could erase signatures. The legal process didn't explode in one dramatic movie scene. It moved like paperwork usually moves. Forms, follow-ups, waiting, then another form. Northgate's fraud review and insurer pressure killed the sale. Mercer Oakhomes walked. Richard's creditor problem didn't disappear, but East Mercer stopped being his emergency ATM. Lena and I hired a real property attorney together. After a week of silence and one exhausted coffee shop meeting where she finally said, I think he thought he was entitled to do it. It wasn't an apology, exactly. It was the first honest sentence she'd said in months. Our attorney helped us terminate Richard's management access in writing, notify tenants where to send rent, and change locks and mailbox keys. We set up a dedicated email for East Mercer, separate bank account for rent, and monthly shared statements so no one person controlled the flow of information. I learned more about documentation in 6 weeks than in the previous 31 years. I also started therapy because I couldn't sleep without replaying the scanner stamp on my license. My therapist said something that stuck. Betrayal trauma isn't only about what was taken. It's about what reality you can't return to. I could not return to being the daughter who assumed dad's shortcuts were harmless. Richard kept trying to bypass boundaries. He sent flowers to school. I had the office refuse delivery. He mailed me a handwritten letter about family legacy. I scanned it, saved it, and didn't answer. He left voicemails saying he'd make Lena whole if I withdrew complaints. I forwarded them to counsel. Months later, when one of the duplex furnaces failed in January, I helped pay for replacement immediately, my half, via the property account, documented in a shared spreadsheet. Lena cried on the phone and said, "I thought helping family meant covering for Dad." I said, "Helping family means making sure nobody can fake our names again." It wasn't warm. It was better than warm. It was solid. Then Aunt May handed me a small fireproof pouch for my birthday and winked. It has been 11 months since Dana called my classroom hallway and asked why I was denying my own signature. East Mercer is still ours. The downstairs tenant still lives downstairs and now pays rent through an online portal Lena and I both can see. The upstairs unit is occupied by a nurse who sends maintenance requests with photos and too many thank you emojis. We replaced the back stair rail my grandmother always worried about. I painted the upstairs hallway one Saturday and found myself crying over something as ordinary as trim work because for the first time in a year, the building felt like a home again instead of evidence. People ask if I forgave my father, and I don't have a clean answer. Healing, for me, looked less like reconciliation and more like reliable routines. I don't wake up plotting revenge. I also don't confuse access with love anymore. Richard and I communicate through attorneys on property matters and through short written messages on family logistics. No calls. No surprise meetings. No, just sign this for me. Boundaries sounded cruel to me before this. Now they sound like doors that lock properly. If you are dealing with financial fraud inside a family, here is the practical thing I wish someone had told me on day one. Act fast and document before you argue. Pull county records. Save emails with full headers if you can. Freeze the transaction through the title company or lender as soon as you dispute identity. Protect your credit. Keep a timeline with dates, times, and exact words. And do not let anyone shame you into treating a forged signature like a misunderstanding. Paperwork can feel cold. In my case, paperwork is what saved me. Certified copies, timestamps, a notary block, one honest title officer, and the stubborn habit of reading before signing. Those things held when family stories didn't.